The ideas that gave birth to our nation are the ideas that our nation is resistant to right now, and we should talk about that all the time.
In a world where narratives are shaped by corporations and gatekeepers, independent voices matter more than ever. Badlands Media brings together citizen journalists, researchers, and independent thinkers.
The truth is triggering.
Question the narrative. Explore the facts.
It's authenticity, courage, resilience.
Search for the truth others won't.
It's not about being first or being right.
The information war is changing.
It's about being authentic.
Embrace the friction.
Embrace the friction.
Shut the f*** up.
Authentically antagonizing. Join the movement.
I'm going to say how I feel.
Follow Badlands Media.
This is about the future.
The Badlands. What are the Badlands? Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Good evening and welcome to the No Treason podcast. This is episode 28 and it is a pre-record. As you can see, I am joined by Paulie Mathanon, who will be my regular guest host for this series because he is an expert, whether he wants to admit he is or not. And that's what we do on here. We argue from authority and from experts. So, get in line. Last week, we kicked off this new series on ether physics by not actually really talking about the ether at all, really, which I did forewarn people about that, so they can't blame me too much. Instead, we were joined by Chris Paul for a conversation that Chris Paul is wont to have about the sort of mindset that would justify challenging the expert class's claims about the nature of reality, in spite of the fact that we ourselves are not quote-unquote experts. Oh, the horror. Tonight, we are going to lean on that justification to tap into an ancient debate about the nature of reality itself. And then we'll zoom in and get down to the business of actually discussing the ether itself. But first, Stack Sats with River, the Bitcoin-only platform built by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. Why River? Zero fee recurring buys. Stack Bitcoin effortlessly, hourly, daily, weekly, or monthly. 3.5% Bitcoin interest on cash. FDIC insured. No minimums. Withdraw anytime. Expert-based U.S. support. U.S.-based support. There we go. Tongue-tied. Human help plus private client services for big buys if you're $100,000 or more. And mazel tov to you for that. Business accounts, boost your balance sheet with Bitcoin, earn 3.5% paid in interest paid in Bitcoin. Top tier wallet, send, receive, and manage Bitcoin securely. Unmatched security, full reserve custody, multi-sig, cold storage, and proof of reserves. Join the Bitcoin revolution at badlandsmedia.tv/river and earn real returns. Then we have a word from the InfoWar Quartermaster.
It's finally here, our second annual mega sale. This sale only comes around once a year, so take advantage of the best offers ever while you can. For example, save 50% on our Giza Dream bed sheets, as low as $29.98. And for the first time ever on TV, My Pillow mattresses and My Pillow mattress toppers as low as $99.98. And you save 50% on our Lux Pure 6-piece towel sets. Regular $69.98, now only $39.98. And our best-selling standard My Pillows, regular $49.98, On sale for $17.98. Wait on it. Mega sale only $14.98. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use this promo code to take advantage of our second annual mega sale. But wait, there's more. To make the mega sale even more special, when you order right now, your order's going to ship absolutely free.
And then last but not least, we have soft disclosure.
I don't say this lightly. This lotion changes people.
My knuckles would actually start to crack. Started using the soft disclosure lotion, and I am very impressed. Even within just a few days, I've noticed a tremendous difference.
That's not a script. That's what happens when something actually works.
It puts the lotion on its skin or else it gets the hose again.
Yeah, that line keeps coming up. Because when you don't use it, your skin starts acting up.
Every single ingredient in soft disclosure is intentionally chosen. There's no filler ingredients. It is not like this BS product where they have a bunch of ingredients. Every ingredient listed is for a purpose.
Over 65-star reviews for the lotion alone. Not influencers, not actors, just people whose skin finally shut up. Soft disclosure lotion. Once you try it, you'll understand why people won't stop talking about it. Visit softdisclosure.com and use code Badlands and get 10% off.
All right. I think that's one of my shortest intros ever. But let's get right on into it. So, Polymathanon, it is good to see you, brother. Just as by way of introduction, Paulie and I met through Chris Paul's Telegram chat a couple of years ago, or I can't remember exactly how long it's been. But we just kind of interacted in the chat, struck up a friendship off on the side, and found that we had a lot of converging interests and perspectives. And one of them was ether physics. We had listened to the same people and had a very similar perspective on that sort of thing. So when I was thinking about doing something like an ether physics series, Paulie being a co-host for that was an obvious choice in my mind. But if you wouldn't mind, give some measure of introduction to yourself as it, whatever you feel like giving, and as it pertains to your interest in the ether as well.
Okay, as far as that is concerned, this goes back to I want to say probably 1999, 2000. Give or take, when I had my initial sort of awakening, sort of red pilling to certain things, thanks to a coworker of mine that woke me up to certain things. First of all was my understanding of life in general, of I guess I could say about my view through the lens of what was real concerning God, concerning creation, concerning all of those things. I became a Christian, born again at the time. And at the same time, he told me about a lot of different things that were going on that I had no clue about. He clued me into guys like Bill Cooper and some of the other guys. I started looking into some of their things, and I was intrigued. And what ultimately led me down that path was looking at, from my background, being in...
You have an engineering background, correct?
Right. Yes. I'm, by trade, I'm an engineer. That's what I do. I started off in the medical field. I was in medical school back in early 90s, and I got out of that. I dropped out of that kind of early, and instead shifted my focus onto more the physical sciences, engineering, physics, different things like that. That was more in tune with where my mind was. And even as I was looking at those things, I saw some issues, but I wasn't really like honed in on, okay, like this is the problem. It was just, I saw that there's something wrong with this construct that I can't put my finger on, but there's something wrong with it. And that culminated for me on 9/11. When I saw that happen, with the buildings, with everything that went on, and as other people are just in shock and awe of everything that was happening, I'm just sitting there looking at it and going, okay, that couldn't possibly happen the way that they're telling us that happened. That's not physically possible. No, this is a bullshit story. There's something else going on here. And then I really dug my heels in and started to look at it. Short story is, there is a Dr. Judy Wood wrote a book about this, about all the various strange things that were going on with it that cannot be explained by tableside normal explanations, that there's something else going on, not saying that you know what it is. Only
it just doesn't match the
disproves what you know is false.
Right.
Based on evidence, based on logic, based on these kind of things. And then I really looked into that, and really what I did was I looked at, okay, is there any possibility that some of these ideas of alternate theories about the physics that I had learned, that I'd spent so many years and so many classes going through, could be wrong foundationally? You know, I hadn't really questioned it. I just accepted it as fact without questioning it. And as I went back and looked at it, I said, oh, wow, yeah, this actually doesn't really make a whole lot of sense if I look at it at a foundational level. It's just a narrative construct that doesn't actually match what I can see phenomenally in front of me.
Yeah. So that's interesting that 9/11 kind of started you down the road of looking into ether physics. For those of you that aren't aware, Dr. Judy Wood wrote a book called Where Did the Towers Go, or something to that effect. And she postulates some type of directed energy being involved in that event. And I find a lot of her stuff very, very interesting, which I've seen an interview with her with an actual physicist, and he's arguing, well, if you do the math, like the type of energy that would be involved in doing what you're claiming happened doesn't exist in modern physics. And it's like, well, that's true. That's right. So let's reevaluate the foundational issues there. My own introduction to the ether came through in the Q movement. There's Martin Geddes was a big name back in the day, and in 2019 he mentioned a guy that you and I have both listened a lot to. That is Ken Wheeler. He's on YouTube, Theoria Apophasis, and he is big into the photography world, and so is Martin Geddes. And I think that was the context that Martin had introduced Ken's work. I happened to then start watching his videos. Didn't understand them for a long time. He's very difficult to listen to, but I've read through his book, and I think he presents a very compelling case. And that's the model of the ether that we're going to be discussing on the course of this series. Will be Ken's particular flavor of it, because as we'll get into here in a minute, it's not a monolithic concept. There are many different variations of what people might refer to as the ether. So when someone says, "Oh yeah, I believe in the ether," that's not just a one and done answer. There's a lot of options there, because really, as I indicated in the intro, what we're discussing here is not something new. This is not a brand new topic of debate. This is an ancient debate that goes back probably as
Thousands
early
of
as
years.
human beings, were contemplating what is the nature of, maybe once we got kicked out of the garden because Adam was able to walk with God. I'm sure he had quite a lot of answers to some pretty foundational questions. We don't have that opportunity anymore thanks to sin, but people have been debating this, and it really does boil down, if you distill all the different answers to the question, what is the nature of reality? What is stuff? What is stuff made of? Why do things work the way they do? What explains the things that we can observe? It really does boil down to, you mentioned this last week, atomism, not Adam, but atom, ATOM, atomism versus the ether. So if you would give us a rundown on that basic history. So encapsulate 6,000 years of human history and contemplation down into a couple minutes.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's just that easy.
So I would say, as a primer note on what I would say is atomism versus ether, and keeping it very, very basic. Okay. So first, in response, I'd say, as you mentioned, from ancient times, there's only been two ideas that have been postulated as to the nature of creation. That being that it is either particle based or it is medium based.
And that would be atomism is the particle, and then medium would be the ether.
Yes. Okay. And I'll add a few descriptions or distinctions here, regarding what we're referring to when we say these things. But that basically, atomism. What do I mean by atomism? Well, I mean the particle-based paradigm. It was established more or less. It might have gone back further, but the mainstream story is that it was established in ancient Greece by Democritus. It's further developed in the 19th century into various different models with the likes of, John Dalton, Bohr, Schrodinger, Albert Einstein, Richard Feynman, and the like. The basic framework being that all matter consists of tiny, indivisible, indestructible, eternal particles that they called atoms.
Mm-hmm.
Atoms, the word etymology being atomos, as Democritus described, meaning uncuttable or undivisible.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these atoms, they were infinite in number, move in an empty void, and they are all made of the same fundamental substances.
Mm-hmm.
Atomism as a term is being used here as being synonymous with quantum mechanics, QED, and it's
QED being, let's go ahead and make sure we define our terms here. What do you mean by QED?
Well, just the quantum mechanics, QED, and part and parcel to say Einstein's relativity.
Okay, and QED that's quantum electrodynamics, I think.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Feynman's layout of that, and how Feynman, or say Leonard Susskind, or some of these others would have defined what it is. Basically saying that everything is physical, and that the metaphysical is basically ignored. That the particles,
and that's a key point, that the metaphysical is basically ignored. And I talked about this last week. The thing that always bothered me growing up is that the spiritual was never really made room for, and certainly in science, like no good science starts with the presupposition that in the beginning God, because that would be bringing a bias to it, as if, and this happens in the theological world as well, especially when studying the history of the canon of scripture or something like that, that we can create a model that just eliminates all bias, and we're just these empty shells coming and studying nature. And the problem with that is that it's just clearly not true. You are bringing your presupposition, and the presuppositions that when it comes to the nature of the physical world or even the non-physical world, we are bringing either that it's made of stuff, indivisible little particles, which oh, we found out today that actually the atom is not the smallest particle. It goes down even smaller than that. But that is when you're coming up with a theory then on how something works, where you land on that binary really does impact your actual theoretical frameworks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So when I am saying, at least when I am saying atomism, I'm saying that they're saying that everything is physical and that the metaphysical is basically ignored.
Yeah.
That particles are what mediate creation through their interactions.
Right. And we see this with when they describe light, or that it has a photon, that there's an actual particle that and we'll get into this, as far as what light actually is. And you'll see this in videos if anyone goes on YouTube and you just listen to some people talking about their various theories and whatnot, or people talking about their various theories, they will use terms like photons, electrons, things like that, where they're trying to say that when light is quote unquote traveling, that there is a physical little particle that is moving from the light source to your eye. And that is, in essence, what an atomist would say. There's something physical that's actually traveling.
Yes. It's a reification of the idea that everything must be matter and or particle based.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then on the flip side, we have a medium, which we would refer to as the ether. And there's obviously lots of variations to that. And we'll get into some of that, because actually part of the current mainstream view is atomism. That should be apparent. There's lots of different like subsets within it. Quantum mechanics is obviously sort of the big one today. But the ether is saying that actually there is a substrate of reality that is not a physical substance that you can measure, because the word quantum is taken from quantity, quantify, where you can count and measure things. So the ether is essentially postulating there's actually something that is subset to the things that we can count, because we're not denying a physical reality, but we're saying that there's a layer below that is not actually physical. And that's kind of the challenge then, is to demonstrate that. And that as a construct has been removed from respected scientific pursuit today. And it was done so with, if you want to touch briefly on the Michelson-Morley experiment back in, 1887 or something like that. That's what is used to say, well, the ether's been disproved. We can move on from that.
Right. Yeah. So as you had said, the ether is basically the essence or the source of all of the medium modalities, let's say.
What do you mean by modality?
Different forms of the field, to where you can have light might be one modality, electricity might be one, magnetism is another one. That's no different than saying ice, water, and steam are all different modalities of water.
Yeah.
They're all still water, but they're still different forms of the water being expressed based on different temperature and pressure and whatever.
And actually, for those listening, bookmark that analogy in your mind, because that is going to come up a little bit later in this episode, as far as observations from the physical world that we can see without being an expert, and how being able to recognize those patterns and then apply them to the non-physical ether is a worthwhile practice. So bookmark that idea for the audience.
Okay, so before I get into Michelson-Morley, just basically that the ether is it's a metaphysical aspect of creation. There's physical, and then there's metaphysical, which is to say space and counter space.
Okay. And we'll define these terms so people don't freak out.
Right. Yeah. So the ether itself would be not space, but counter space. In other
And
words,
sorry to
inertia.
jump in again too. Space is not, we're not talking outer space. We're talking magnitude.
We're talking about
volume, right?
Yes.
The
Yeah.
fact that I can move my hand through an open area is a result of a
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Space.
Yep. So not space, but counter space. Inertia, or you could say the rest locus, I guess, of the field conditions, whether those be manifested as dielectric or magnetic or combined as electricity or light. We can get into those things later.
Mhm.
It's the medium from which creation behaves through these field interactions.
Mhm.
So to sum it up kind of neatly, you could say that atomism is quantitative, the
Mhm.
ether is qualitative.
Okay.
Atomism is materialistic, while the ether is holistic, and that atomism is particle based, while the ether is medium based.
Okay. And for those listening, if none of that made any sense, that's okay. Because what we're really we're describing a paradigm that is completely different from anything and everything that we've ever been taught when it comes to the nature of the physical world. And it's going to take a little bit to wrap our minds around, but the goal of this series is to go through this methodically and carefully. So we're going to introduce concepts and terms and stuff throughout this episode that we will flesh out later. But and I appreciate that backdrop. So using the understanding of the two paradigms as a backdrop, that this has been a debate that has gone on for thousands of years. Obviously, the Greeks were probably not the first to talk about these things, but we have records of them debating these types of things. So we'll credit the Greeks with that. They certainly came up with the word atom. But
well, of course you're going to say that. You're Greek.
Oh, naturally, yeah. I got it. We're not doing so hot now, so I got to take whatever I can. The next step then is to discuss another cipher, if you will, for being able to judge whether or not one of those paradigms is closer to the mark or other. So we've set the table. These are the two. We have atomism, we have ether. And so the paradigm that I was been thinking about this past week is predictive ability versus explanatory ability, prediction versus explanation. Because most people, if they're interested in any of this at all, really just want to understand why stuff works. It's the age-old toddler question. Why? Why does this happen? Why does that happen? We want an explanation. We want to know the why. We want to know the how. Yep. Because most of us are not engineers. You are. I'm not. I have an engineering mind, but I was too lazy in school to actually pursue that. And, we're not actually the ones building stuff where having a firm grasp on this, these concepts really matters. But there is still a drive to understand, and I think that is that's worth investigating. And so, thinking about it in terms of prediction versus explanation, what I've noticed is that there's a tension in modern physics between the ability to explain versus the ability to predict. Probably because prediction carries with it more of an economic value. There's more of an immediate necessity to be able to predict things for the purposes of engineering solutions, products, technologies, etc. Plus, you can show, in a paper, like, look what I did, and I predicted this, and this was the outcome. Yay me! My name goes on a plaque. And quantum mechanics, what I kept running into, really prides itself in being able to tell you when or what is going to happen. They claim to be able to predict things with high precision, and that's how we can get technology like semiconductors or whatever. But what I've found digging into this stuff is it's kind of like, going back to the old comic strip Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin would play Calvin ball with Hobbes. And the rule of Calvin ball was that there are no rules and you make it up as you go. And using that as an analogy, it seems like every time the particle physics world encounters a phenomenon that they can't explain, or that it's an outcome of an experiment that they weren't able to predict, they just add a particle. So at this point, my
Yep.
understanding is there are 17 fundamental particles. Don't try to decode that one. There are 4 separate forces. You have things like antimatter, you have dark matter, you have dark energy. You have all these different concepts that they have created. They just keep adding to the ledger, and it gets more and more complex, so that the hope that an average person like me, or even you, relative to these high class intellectuals, which is not a dig on you, it's it's a dig more on them. We have just basically no hope of understanding what the hell they're even talking about.
Right.
And
Yeah.
what I've also found is much of the proof of their so-called predictions really actually requires stuff that you and I have zero access to, which would be an expensive lab, highly technical and tuned equipment that is even designed and built within their theoretical frameworks. So it kind of ends up being a control loop that oh, look, I predicted this thing would happen inside this mathematical construct that I've built, and it has no bearing on reality. And as a result, because we can't personally verify, to kind of harken back to Chris Paul's, basic MO, there's just a lot of trust me, bro, when it comes to this type of stuff. They sound smart. They go on the Joe Rogan circuit. They go on the podcast circuit, and it's frustrating as an individual, because it's like, well, I want to seem smart, so you just end up, to Chris's point, memorizing the details of a complete and total fiction. And the problem then you see is that, well, they claim to be able to predict stuff, but then they just readily admit they can't explain any of it. You even have some famous quotes from Feynman. I think he said, anyone who claims to understand quantum mechanics doesn't understand quantum mechanics.
Exactly. and this is their guru of quantum mechanics, and he's saying you can't possibly understand it.
And people are welcome, do research on your own, look it up. There's a number of heavy hitting names in this field that just flat out say, we're not here to explain to you how or why. We're just here to explain what. We were here to calculate. And that's not satisfying to me, because in contrast, the best theory in my mind is one that allows you to actually explain reality and not just predict an outcome. Because if all you can do is predict an outcome, it will be a natural limitation to the usefulness of your theory, because you might, by not being able to explain what's happening, you might not even be able to conceive or perceive of other potential avenues or outcomes of your experiments. And so the best theory in my mind is the one that does not need to be constantly revised and inflated every time a new phenomenon is uncovered. And you have all these paradoxes in the quantum world. You have the particle wave duality that they talk about with light and things like that.
Right.
So
you have quantum foam, you have quantum fluid, quantum
vacuum,
tunneling, or
right.
my favorite, virtual particles.
Virtual particles,
I mean,
right.
Virtual particles.
Right.
I mean, the list seems to be like ever growing, with more and more complex mathematical equations that are just used to facilitate creating predictions.
Right.
So, I mean, with that kind of framing, how does an average person understand what in the world is actually going on?
Yeah. Well, and the point that got discussed last week, and this is the same parallel that I see with what I covered in Trial by Jury. You have a legal system that has experienced similar bloat that seems designed to prevent your average person from actually being able to make any use of it. And if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, that was a comment I made last week, it's probably a duck. Well, if you have a system that is
fish.
If you have a system that is designed to, or a system that you can infer it's designed by its effect, the effect is the average person has no hope of understanding or making use of it. Well, maybe that was the intent of it going into it. So I have a video I'm going to show, and this is an old comedy sketch that is perfectly describing the tension between prediction versus explanation. So we'll go ahead and play this here.
You were going to make dinner? I couldn't remember. What?
I just wish you'd take some initiative and cook your own dinner for once. I've been at work too, and now I get to come home and pack the dishwasher and then unpack the dishwasher and cook dinner and put the washing on, and you know what? I can't continue to live like this because it's not me.
Hey, relax. It's going to be all right.
How?
Here, I'll just show you. Okay, I've been doing this since we moved in. See this basket thing? I don't know how it happens, if it's the house or what, but any dirty clothes you put in this basket, somehow the next day they're just clean, folded, and in a perfect pile in your bed.
Quantum laundry.
You're not serious.
I couldn't believe it at first either, but it just keeps happening. That's why I didn't tell you. I didn't want to jinx it.
You are insane.
Try it, you'll see. Unless it's only chosen me. See, I don't know.
I can't do this.
No, wait. There's other things too. Plates, cutlery, pizza boxes, dirty tissues, anything you leave on this coffee table just vanishes overnight. I mean, sometimes I'll see how far I can push this thing and I'll just leave shit everywhere. And then sure enough, the next day, it's all gone. It's just vanished. It's magic. No, she wouldn't have left me. This is what I think happened. I heard her get up in the middle of the night to get a drink or something. She must have fallen onto the magic coffee table and just vanished.
Are you insane?
No, he's not insane. I've got the same coffee table at home.
Oh, that's perfect.
So, as you can see, no, I've got the same coffee table at home. To your point, that's a quantum laundry basket. That guy's ability to predict an outcome was spot on, but his lack of understanding of why his predictions worked led to ultimately a total collapse of his system, which, levity being a good tool in teaching is a comedic example, but it demonstrates the problem that we're talking about here, where you have a paradigm that works until it doesn't work because it's not the right paradigm. Had he understood that relationships are more complicated than magic coffee tables, then the guy might still, have his girlfriend around. So using that as the backdrop, moving into kind of setting the table for, do we observe things in nature that would lead us to conclude that there is something, you can call it the ether, or that there is a medium? And it's the purpose of mentioning the Michelson-Morley experiment earlier. I forgot to mention this, was that prior to the Michelson-Morley experiment, and then for a number of decades following, being an ether theorist was common. That was sort of the baseline. Excuse me.
Yeah, it's what they would call classical physics.
Yeah, classical physics. But the Michelson-Morley experiment, by disproving a particular model of the ether, which is what it ultimately did. They claimed that there would be drag or something like that as the Earth is moving through the ether. All they did was they demonstrated that the one they tested was not viable, which just means that one wasn't viable. It doesn't mean that ether physics as a concept, that the need for a medium is no longer necessary. And really, I think up until you had guys like Tesla were firm ether theorists, and it seems like around when he died is when really the full tilt of physics switched over to a purely atomistic view. There was kind of tension there for those decades, but then once Tesla's voice was gone, it really, really sped up to that degree.
Yeah, and Tesla and Steinmetz both. Yep.
Yes. So what I wanted to discuss here is what we observe in nature, or what do we observe in nature that tells us intuitively that there must be a medium. I used the term earlier, a substrate of reality. And we understand that there are things like in the physical world, there's frequency, there's vibration, there are waves, but we all recognize that those things need something, because a wave is not a thing. It's something that a thing does. And so then the obvious question is, when people talk about a frequency, and this is not even in like in particle physics, just in general, a frequency of what? The frequency of your trips to the bathroom at night, the frequency of the, how often do you go to the store? The vibration, what is vibrating?
This is a wave.
Right. what is but
No,
what,
that's my hand undulating. It's not a wave.
right? So a wave then, like, imagine trying to describe to someone an ocean wave without the medium itself, without the ocean. Like, it's not possible. That seems to be what's happening in modern physics, where they're trying to describe phenomena that require a medium, but they just don't want to admit there's a medium. We can see waveforms. That's a term that gets thrown around in quantum lingo, waveforms. We can see waveforms in nature all over the place. And in every circumstance, there must be a medium. And it is the medium itself that is waving. The ocean waves, to put it bluntly. You have a disturbance that produces a ripple, that it looks like the ripple is traveling, but all that's happening is that medium is just pulsing up and down. And that will become relevant later. We can therefore intuit that if something behaves like a wave, then something must be waving. To your point, your hand is just waving back and forth.
Yep.
Because a wave is not a thing in and of itself. It's what something does. And this makes sense to our minds. We see this in nature, in the physical world. We understand that this is true. But we also know that there are phenomena that are not physical. And this is really where ether physics become sort of the rubber meets the road of the need for a medium. There are, it's not physical like an ocean wave. It's not physical like compression waves of the atmosphere, like sound. There's no sound in a vacuum because there's no medium there for, like, my voice is not producing sound. My voice is simply just compressing and rarefacting the medium, the atmosphere.
Scream in space. See how that works for you.
Exactly.
There's nothing there to vibrate.
We can ask the Artemis astronauts. Or you think of a guitar string, you pluck it, and you can literally see the thing vibrating and producing a wave.
Yes, yes.
But we have things, and these have been mystifying to human beings forever. So I have here, this is not what's mystifying. This is an Allen wrench. But what I have here are a couple of, and just because I didn't want to take them apart, these are some neodymium iron boron magnets. And what I'm going to do is show people what everyone has played with in their life at some point. I'm going to bring this magnet close to the object, and it jumps up without me actually going down and touching it. So we have a gap of space in between these two objects, and we have all played with magnets. We understand that this is a phenomena that's not physical. There's something going on in between this ferric metal and this magnetized material.
Right. That is not a particle interaction.
We understand that there's something going on in there. And then when you start to see waveforms that exist on like an electromagnetic spectrum, like radio waves, microwaves, light, they talk about light having wave. It's a wave particle duality. That they can pass through physical barriers like glass, solid walls. It can transfer through a vacuum, so there's no atmosphere. So the obvious conclusion then is that if something waves, or if you see a wave form, you are seeing that something is waving. And if it's not a physical substance, that indicates there is something non-physical, as, again, to use that phrase, like the substrate of our reality.
Yep.
And this really gets down to a question then that you'll hear this term a lot in quantum particle physics, lingo. They talk about fields, and you've already mentioned fields a couple of times, and that's really going to be something that we're going to end up defining over the course of this whole series, because really the question when it comes to someone coming up with a particle-based version of reality is, what is a field? Because we recognize a field, there is, going back to this magnet, there is a field around this magnet that you can't see.
Yep.
You
it's
can't
acting
feel
upon it. Something is happening.
Something is going on with this, where it is producing a non-physical something
Yep.
And the question is, what is that? And modern physics does not have an answer for that. Going back to the explanation versus prediction, tension. They don't have an answer for why this works. A medium-based paradigm does have an answer for that, and that's what we're going to be getting into. Because one of the things that I wanted to bring up was that a wave, a frequency, a vibration, a field, those are all attributes. And the biggest, you could call it the sin of modern physics, is the reification, the making real of attributes. And that's something that you've talked about a number of times in our conversations, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So this begs the question that there must be a medium, and that's what we're going to spend the rest of the series on. And did you have any comments on that? Because I'm going to jump into the pattern recognition stuff that I talked about before we got started.
Oh no, that was pretty good. I would only say, as a primer, maybe, and it might be overload to say such, but to say that everything that is observable in creation is determined by fields, and fields are not particles.
Right. A way that I've phrased this with people in using the term ether, because that's just shorthand for the medium. That the ether is the medium in which all things exist, and of which all things are made.
Yes.
Which is
from which, by which, and through which. Yes. Exactly.
And that is such a mind bender, because we have physical reality. This is I'm physically touching this, at least I perceive to be physically touching this hard piece of metal, and yet it is made up of something that is actually not physical. Ultimately, if you really just distill down what's actually going on in there. And that's something that we're going to explain. And as a teaser, this is frozen light. Just going to throw that out there.
Hard light.
Yeah. As the saying goes, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, but you can make him thirsty. So we'll get into more of that later. Regarding then how we could possibly study something that is not physical, like how in the world could we possibly understand how something like that works? One of the other problems I have with modern physics is the laundry list, the quantum laundry basket list of the different particles and the different forces, and you have all these competing ideas, and there's all these separate individual things, and gravity is its own separate entity, and all this kind of stuff. And the beautiful thing about the medium is that you realize that actually it's all one thing expressing itself differently, to your point about modalities. So I'm going to bring up here to show how we can use our observation of the physical world to inform then our thoughts about the non-physical. And this isn't the spiritual non-physical, although it's probably part of that. Because actually, as we in our personal conversations on this over the last couple of years, we've delved into trying to apply these concepts to all manner of things like relationships and spirituality and politics and everything. And you find out that a lot of the principles that we're going to end up discussing over the next however many weeks that we end up being able to do this, there's a lot of things that are explained by these fundamental principles, which makes sense to me that there would be a grand unifying principle, considering the fact that there was a single creator.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to pull this up here. Everyone has seen this before. This is just a random picture of lightning that I pulled up on the internet a little bit ago. So you can see you have the main trunks coming down, and you've got the the branches going off, and they get smaller and smaller. And if you could zoom in, you'd probably see lots of other little fingers shooting out. So this is lightning. We're aware this is an electromagnetic phenomenon. And then this is something called Lichtenberg or fractal wood burning. And this is where you place two electrodes in a board. I think sometimes people soak it in salt water. And
with a grounding spike.
Yep. They introduce a current.
Yep.
And this is the electrical current as it burns through the wood. So it looks like lightning. Goes, oh yeah, you're using electricity. All right. This is I've used this before, but this is where I like to show that, in this case with lightning, you have the medium of the atmosphere and actually the ether as well. We'll get into that later. With the fractal wood burning, the medium is the wood, also the ether, but we'll get into that later. And then here, this is Google Maps. Where my cursor is here is that's St. Louis. So you have this is the Mississippi River, and this is the Mississippi River watershed around St. Louis. And you can clearly see the same pattern. It looks just like, to bring back up the fractal burning here.
Yep, the Lichtenberg patterns.
The Lichtenberg pattern, and then you have a watershed. Now here the medium is the earth, and you have water running from high ground down to the low ground of the river basin, carving its way through the earth and creating this pattern. But this demonstrates something. We can use this pattern recognition to see that there's something similar going on. Going back to to the lightning.
Yes, that's self-similarity.
And so in this way, what is happening with the watershed? Well, what's happening with the watershed is you have water at high ground moving to low ground. With weather, you have high pressure and low pressure. It seems like with electrical expressions like lightning or electricity, you have charge, discharge. These are all forms of a phrase that you'll end up hearing a lot listening to this series, is that everything is pressure mediation.
Yep.
And we can see that you have high ground to low ground. That's essentially high pressure down to low pressure. That's the way storms function. I showed the pictures last week of the golden ratio in nature. Same thing. We can see these patterns, and we're going to end up seeing that exact same pattern in the magnetic field when I pull up the ferrocell at a later episode.
Right. Yeah. I would jump in there to say that, that the ether itself, it is the essence or the source of all these field modalities, whether they're whether it's magnetic or whether lightning there, which is dielectric discharge, or otherwise. They're all non-material projected images of the absolute, meaning that they are non-physical principles from which, by which, and through which the physical attributes are known. And because they are self-similar, like fractals, you're talking about principle and attribute, one and one. Now you're talking about golden ratio, golden section, just like what you had just said. The phyllotaxis of growth, the Fibonacci sequence, it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
They all follow the same patterns, and they are all visible and clearly demonstrable in nature.
And so with that as like the foundation, like we see these things like, wow, that looks the same there. That looks the same there. That looks the same there. That the intuition with that is that there is something at the core level with those things that is expressing itself, or that is, there are, and that this is where the whole concept of laws of nature even comes from, is noticing patterns in nature where it's, and this is what Spooner's point is with natural law in regards to human behavior, and that there is something codified by God in nature that governs certain outcomes, when it comes to human interaction. But then the same thing applies to the physical world, and that's what we are going to be getting into. So over the next number of episodes, I'm not sure how long this is going to end up going. We're just going to go until we feel like we're satisfied with with what we cover. Defining, you've used terms like dielectric, so that people aren't just hearing these terms and it goes right over their head. We're going to use terms like inertia or the plane of inertia or things like that. And I know what inertia is. Well, there's a different connotation to it that we're going to get into. What is actually energy? Because that's another question that particle physics has
a big one.
No answer to. And the answer is it's the ether, essentially, which is a bit reductionist, but and at some point it'll get to like, well, what's the ether made of, and we'll get into all that kind of stuff. But the question, I guess, to leave everyone with is when it comes to the predictive versus the explanation, is it better to explain something or predict? And ideally you get both, but I would rather have the explanation. And then when it comes to attributes like waves, like fields, what are those things pointing to? We know from observing physical nature, it's pointing to a medium. And so when we see things that aren't physical in nature, but still exhibit the same patterns of behavior of physical things that need a medium, there clearly must be a medium that exists on that sublayer. So that is kind of the kickoff of the series in earnest. Last week was more philosophical. This is getting a little bit more into the actual discussion of things. We will be live next Sunday, God willing. The goal, and this might end up changing, but the goal is to demonstrate the dual slit experiment.
Oh, that'd be good.
And having you on board to help explain what is actually going on there. I think that is going to be a really useful visual aid for seeing exactly what we're talking about here in regards to something's waving, something's acting like waves there, and we can see that when it comes to light. And I think that'll be a good foundation moving forward, and then we'll get into the rest of that as time goes on. You have any closing thoughts?
Oh, well, okay. Closing thoughts, I guess. Well, like you had said previously, this ongoing discussion, it is a very ancient debate indeed, as to the underlying structure of reality. And I'd say structure very loosely. This is not some new novel idea. Right. Mainstream physics today, which is almost entirely atomism, the axioms with which the understanding of creation, it's built upon this like seemingly ever expanding set of stories, and just pretext after pretext are baked in. It's premised largely from the garb of the mathematical predictions, and those predictions are not explanations.
Yeah.
So at the core of atomism, it's scientific materialism. I would even say it's not based on sound logic, in my opinion, and therefore irrational. I mean, it's what God's creation is and how it works are important in my mind to understand. These are indeed their first principal issues to all of reality.
Yeah.
And I would just leave it at that, I guess.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. I'm thinking ahead for some, because we're recording this Friday night. I should be able to be in the chat. I imagine you will be as well. So
I plan to.
Oh, hopefully this prediction ends up being a real good prediction. Speaking of predictions. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining me. Thank you, Paulie, for tagging along for this adventure. We've been talking about this for years, and I'm excited to be able to do this with you. And
oh yeah,
as with anything, and I'm sure you experience this as well. When you actually go in to teach something, it forces you to dig even deeper and make sure you understand this stuff. And that's always a good exercise. So I'm grateful to be doing this with you, and grateful to Badlands for putting up with my nonsense, and now your nonsense.
Not my nonsense. Yeah, thanks so much.
All right. Well, with that, again, I'll remind everyone that this is the No Treason podcast, which is why, and named after Lysander Spooner's No Treason essay, which is why I close out with this video. So we'll see you all next week.
Why a spoon, cousin? Why not an axe?
Because it's dull, you twit. It'll hurt more.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.